Good morning. Good morning. All right. Happy Friday. So glad to be in one room with all of you for the past few days. I hope everyone's had a wonderful conference. Before we go any further, I'm on limited time, but we do need to make a moment. For the past 3 days, Jamu and Lavender have served as our sign language interpreters. Can we please get a round of applause for them? Thank you so much. So I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our next speaker. Kevin Fagan is an award-winning journalist and a passionate storyteller. Most of you know him from his work with the San Francisco Chronicle, and I want to tell you a little story about how I came to know Kevin. It was my first week on the job at the Alliance, and at that time I was running media relations for the organization along with other duties. And Nan Roman, who was the CEO at that time, walked into my office about, I don't know, the second or third day, and he said, I had a call last night with Kevin Fagan at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I told him you were new here, and I asked him to call you. I said, thank you. And 2 days later, my phone rang, and he said, hi, it's Kevin. You got a second? I said, yes, I do, and I was so excited to help Kevin put together a story. I was so excited to set up some interviews and get him some resources and get him some data or some reports or something, and really work together and impress the boss and put together a great story on homelessness in San Francisco. And the first thing he says is, he tells me his story, what he does, the kinds of stories he works on. Being a shoe leather reporter, really living for the stories of the people on the streets and understanding them better. I said, great. And he says, so how long have you been working in homelessness? So I tell him a little bit about my experience. He says, great. What were you doing before then? I was like, oh, well, I told him about some other work experiences that I had. I'm like, great. Where are you from? So I tell him where I grew up and where I live. So, you got any kids? This is getting weird. And so I tell him about my family. He says, what do you do for fun? I'm starting to think that there's no story here. So we talk a little bit. He says, oh, okay. So your name's Murphy, huh? My name's Fagan. You like Irish music? I'm in a band. At this point, we've been on the phone for half an hour. There's no story. He just wanted to get to know me. I've been doing media relations for a long time. That's never happened to me before. No reporter has ever called me up to get to know me before we work together. And I thought it was kind of bizarre at the time, but as I got acquainted with Kevin's work, it became so obvious that these are the qualities that make him an outstanding reporter. These are the qualities, this curiosity, this familiarity, this kindness, this friendliness, this desire to know more about people, this love. It's love. The love for other people is what makes it possible to earn the trust of people with some of the most severe challenges anywhere in this nation when he covers the chronically homeless and unsheltered people in San Francisco. This is what made it possible for people to open up and share their experiences, and it's what allowed him to write this magnificent book that we're going to learn about today. Very quickly, Kevin Fagan's The Lost and the Found takes an empathetic, character-driven approach to exploring the human side of what's behind the homelessness epidemic. An award-winning journalist and Pulitzer Prize nominee who has covered homelessness for decades and spent extensive time on the streets for his reporting, Fagan has experienced it himself as a young man and brings deep understanding to the crisis. He introduces us to Rita and Tyson, telling the deeply moving story of two unhoused people rescued by their families with the help of Fagan's reporting and their struggle to pull themselves out of homelessness and addiction, ending both with enormous tragedy and triumph. But The Lost and the Found is not just a story of individuals experiencing homelessness. It is also a compelling look at the link between homelessness and addiction and an incisive commentary about housing and equality. Fagan shines a sharp light on this national calamity, and in sharing Rita and Tyson's stories, The Lost and the Found has the potential to change the way we see and help the unhoused. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Kevin Fagan, who will be joined in conversation by the Alliance's and Oliva.
Thank you. That was a really lovely introduction, wasn't it? It was a little surprising.
I remember talking to Tom. He's a nice guy. So's Ann.
So this book is something that I really enjoyed reading. I talked a little bit about it in the opening plenary. Can we get the timer running, folks, so that I don't lose track? And I don't often read books about homelessness in my free time because I think about homelessness a lot in my day job. But I made an exception for this one. And I really enjoyed it. It's beautifully written, and I just want to thank you for writing it.
Thank you. I loved writing it, I'll tell you that.
You can tell that you loved writing it. So I want to start with an opening question. It's a little bit about the why. By my math, you have been doing reporting on homelessness for about 40 years. Is my math right? You don't often talk about your own experiences experiencing homelessness as a young person. And I want to know why now in this book, and why Rita and Tyson. You've talked to hundreds or maybe thousands of people over your career. So tell me a little bit about the why.
Well, first off, why I have done this. I was poor for much of my childhood, and then I had some periods of homelessness after I left home at 16, and sleeping in my car while going to college, various situations. And one thing about writing is you write what you know, and you, as a journalist, I found it was useful for me to explore this subject of homelessness and poverty, because I wanted to figure out, why the hell was I poor? What can be done to address this? And as I dug into the subject more, I loved it. I also did a lot of crime, general assignment. I was an editor, the kind of thing you do in a 40-year career as a journalist. But homelessness, I used to tell my editors, was my happy place, and they'd raise an eyebrow and say, because I watched executions and covered horrible killings. Homelessness, when you write about homelessness, you can actually make a difference. And that's what I love about it. And in the course of interviewing all those hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the years, I ran into Tyson and Rita. In 2003, I was put on the street for 6 months to immerse with a photographer named Brant Ward, and we spent a lot of time at a place called Homeless Island, which, if you read the book, you'll certainly learn a lot about it. And Rita was one of the people living there. She was addicted to heroin and crack, had AIDS, and had abscesses that were about to kill her. And all the other people on the island had similar troubles. And my heart really went out to them, and all of them were kind of tough nuts to get to know. But Rita told me she had 5 kids, she had a life once, and then her boyfriend died on the island. He had flesh-eating disease. It ate him alive, killed him. And at the end of the 6 months, I wrote a 5-day series called Shame of the City. And the first story was all about the island. And her family back in Florida read this and said, wow, didn't realize the depth and the location. And it essentially spurred them to come out and give another try at rescuing Rita. And her sister, Pam, lovely lady, emailed me and said, I'm coming out to do this. And don't try to find me. I'm going to try this by myself. Took her back to Florida. I gave it a year, went back, and found that this had actually worked. She had rehabbed. That struck me. That was different to do the arc of the story from the beginning to the end. And then in the course of reporting those things, I dug into her childhood and everything that had led her to the street. And I've done that on a lot of people, but Rita really touched my heart in a way that was different. We became friends for the next several decades. And with Tyson, I met him a few years ago in a daily story that I did about a homeless shelter that was being proposed. And he was sitting on a piece of cardboard. He'd just smoked meth, and he was doing speedball stuff with the fentanyl, heroin, and meth. And he was clear-headed, and I had a great conversation with him. I thought, what a thoughtful guy. Put him in the story, had a photo. His brother in Ohio read this and called me and said, help me find my brother. I lost him 7 years ago. And I said, great, because I've helped a lot of people try to find people. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We found Tyson, and I've been doing this long enough that I allowed myself to participate in the intervention, but he didn't need much intervention. He was cooked, as street counselors among you will know. He was ready to go, and it was joyful. The word that I keep hearing is joyful here, and hope. It was joyful for me to see him rejuvenate, and to see his family reconnect, and to see a life regenerating. I just loved that. And you'll have to read the book to hear the ending of Tyson, because I'm not supposed to give away the ending.
Please do not.
But so these two people really touched me. I could have written about a whole bunch of people, but the two of them wove together fairly nicely in a narrative fashion to let me do this book.
I agree. I'm glad that you chose these two people. I think that their stories, I know I cried, I laughed, I had so much respect for them and for you as I was reading the book. It felt like a really good choice to me. Although I don't know all the people that you've talked to, this felt really, really good. I want to switch gears for just a little bit. You noticed that we talk about joy a lot on this stage and in this conference. You also noticed that we had healers up here to open our session today. And that's something that we are really focused on. How do we help people sustain themselves in this work? Because it can be really hard. And I've noted, and Tom has noted, that there's been a lot of really good reporters that have been on the homeless beat. I've been doing this for 30-something years. And, but I've also noticed that they burn out after a few years. Covering suffering in the way that homeless beat reporters cover suffering, I think, probably takes a toll. And I wonder, for you who have made it 40 years and you wrote this beautiful book at the end of that kind of journalism career, what do you do to sustain yourself, and how do you continue to write on this topic with such humanity and compassion?
I try to see the inner person when I interview homeless people. I love interviewing homeless people. Sometimes you're talking to someone, they're having an episode, or they're too high to talk. That's fine. That's the dysfunction you're talking to, so you come back later, or you talk to someone else. The people that I can have conversations with, I love, because there's always that inner person in there who doesn't want to be homeless, who had a future once, who was somebody's baby, and I want to reach that, and that helps rejuvenate me. A part of it is, I've had a pretty intense career. I've watched people burn to death. I've been shot at. I've been slashed, mauled by dogs. I mean, when you put that and watched execution.
Just mauled by dogs, whatever, it's fine.
In a homeless camp. But if you put that into context with talking with homeless people and writing things that can actually make a difference, that's a happy thing. That's a good thing. And that keeps me, it's the comparison of, they always say, you need to know the bad to appreciate the good. You need to know the intense to appreciate the hopeful, I guess. And I like Tom said, I'm in a band. I'm in a couple of bands. I write songs. I sing. I meditate. I, do exercise. I've got a lovely family. I mean, most of the people, the chronically homeless people that I deal with, have had journeys much more difficult than anything I had to do. But I had my share of crap happening when I was growing up, and I overcame it, and I have a good life. And I like sharing that with the people I talk to in the street. And after all these years, I'm not afraid to say, after you have a conversation, get what you need to get for your story and connect with someone, the conversation usually rolls around to, well, what do you need to get off the street? I've never met any homeless person who, in the most honest, truthful moment, really wants to be homeless. No one wants to be homeless. And I'll tell you, this organization, I was telling Ann, I'll give a little plug just for a minute, that I've dealt with endless nonprofits and organizations and interviewed everyone from the presidents on down. I love this organization because it has breadth. It gets the severity of the problem from the street on up to the policy level, and you actually care. And I've really appreciated that all these years.
Thank you. So I've chosen a passage that I would like for you to read for the audience. And when you're done with it, I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you wrote that passage and why the approach described in that passage is so important to you, especially as so many members of this audience are trying to shift a really, really dehumanizing narrative that's taking hold across this country about people who are experiencing homelessness, and your approach is very different than that. So would you mind reading the passage? It's
Sure.
on page 238.
Yeah, and you're talking about reporters who burn out. It's funny because the ones who have done homeless writing at the Chronicle usually last a couple of years, and I had a couple of them say, I don't know how you've done this long. It is wearing. It's like doing your work. That's wearing. And writing about it is wearing, but you look for the good within the bad. So this is on page 238. And this is when I'm talking about how we have a system in the country that essentially perpetuates poverty. And I would love to see that addressed. I'd like to see it end. I'd like to see us do better. So I wrote this. But there is this. No matter how far people sink into indigence, the demons of addiction and abandonment or mental illness, there is always that grain of hope. There is always that younger self deep inside them who once had a future and could again. Looking for that hope, talking to street folks about that hope they so often lose touch with, helping my readers understand how awful it can be to be trapped in a life gone wrong and how damnably unjust that is in a society as rich as ours. That has real worth, real emotional reward. It's a relief working with that, and it helps me process what I see and feel.
Tell me why that was important for you to write, and it's towards the end of the book. Yeah.
I think it helped explain why I hang in there with people. A lot of people hit and run on subjects and on profiles. I like following to see if there is some hope in a lot of these narratives. Can't follow everyone. I wrote 5,300 stories for the Chronicle. Can't follow them all. But you folks need the hope inside yourselves. It's a burnout kind of profession because it's wearing, you don't get paid enough, long hours. And in journalism, covering homelessness is, you do 10 interviews to get one great, set of quotes and circumstances to fill what the story that you're trying to write is. You need to keep, to keep regenerating yourself, to keep your keep your flame alive, and doing different aspects of the stories helps, because you're doing one thing over and over and over, it can pound on you. I would often change up a little bit. I do a little more on supportive housing one year. I do a little more on street outreach another. It's like what you do. Every person you meet is different, of course, but you want to change things up a little bit to keep it different and freshen yourself up. And that's how I keep my hope alive for covering the issue. And like I said, I loved writing the book. It was so wonderful getting to know Rita and Tyson's families in a deeper way than I ever had. And they let me write about myself, which, most people like talking about themselves a little bit. And so it's autobiographical, and they let me ride my little hobby horse at the end, talking about how poverty should not exist to the extent that it does in this country. And poverty is, for me, the main reason we keep having homelessness coming at us, happening to people unendingly. And the efforts that you guys do is the bulwark against the tide, and I really appreciate that.
Do you have any tips for the people who are in this room about how they can convince their local reporters, or even in their own communications to the community, how they can do the thing that you just described?
That's tough. I would not want to be on your end of the telephone, because mostly media organizations at their basic level like stories about what's wrong. I mean, we cover the unusual. So who screwed up? What $50,000 fund got wasted? Who's died in a housing complex somewhere? But after I did that 2003 series, I got called by a few folks who were creating something called solutions journalism, and they used it as one of the models for how to address it, because I wrote about solutions at the end of that 5-day series, how to fix it, which is a little presumptuous. Of course, it didn't fix everything, but I focused on supportive housing and street outreach. And so if you're going to sell a story to a reporter, one of these sessions I attended just an hour ago or so was talking about a great program in Alameda County that actually saved millions of dollars by front-ending the care. And I know a lot of programs that front-end the care, and you don't get noticed because it's money that got saved for problems that didn't materialize. That's a hard story to sell. But what you do is you emphasize the money. If you can parse it out with some data that proves things, that's a good story, and that's a happy story. I love writing those kind of stories, and you will find reporters somewhere, somehow, who also love writing those stories.
I think that's a great sort of tip for the folks who are in this room as they're thinking about how to change communications at the local level, and certainly for us as we think about communications at the national level. And I want to go a step further now, and I want to talk about something that I think is hard for a lot of people to talk about. As a field, sometimes we sort of shy away from talking about addiction as part of our work to end homelessness. And we do that. There's a variety of reasons for that. We don't want to be seen as sort of buying into a negative narrative, and there's a number of things, but you sort of take addiction head on in this book, and you are primarily writing about people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Addiction is part of their stories. Why was it important to show that side of their lives, and how, as a field, can we talk about drugs without sacrificing the humanity of the people that we're talking about?
Yeah, you always have to remember that the person who is addicted was not addicted at one point, and some series of steps of fate, bad luck, bad choices, whatever, led them there. But there's always the non-addicted person within the addicted person. I chose early on to focus on the chronically homeless population. Because, as you know, it's only about a third of the total homeless population. The rest are in shelters and a lot self-resolve. But those are the people that we see the most, that the public perceives as being all homeless people, living in tents, you know, causing disruptions in the street. They're the most in crisis, and they need the most help. And so for the chronically homeless population, so many are addicted to something. Many have mental trauma of one form or another. So in my writing, I always like to be as blunt as possible, as straight ahead as possible. And you always get editors, I don't know if there are any other reporters in here, but you always get editors who want to crimp you back because you don't want to ruin people's breakfast, they'd say. Reality is educational, and you have to be as straight up as you can. So addressing addiction and how difficult it is to deal with that, you know, most people have to try rehab about 6 times before it sticks. Most people out in the rest of the world don't know that. They think, oh, give the guy some rehab and it's all okay. It's kind of like the attitude that, you know, give a woman a shelter bed and a sandwich and they'll pull themselves up by a bootstrap. No, it's if you show the depth of how hard it is to deal with these disabilities in the street, maybe people can understand better and make better decisions when they look at this topic, they vote, they support organizations, just better decisions as a society. So I try not to soft soap anything. I mean, I try not to swear when I write because I think that alienates people, but I try to reflect what street people say and do so that you can get a window into what that world really is. Not, no, sugar coating on the window, so to speak, to mix the metaphors. I want you to really see it.
And our last question, we could be up here for, as far as I'm concerned, for hours.
Yeah, I love talking about it. I'm talking about it with you.
Yeah, it's great. So we just have a few minutes left. The last question sort of piggybacks on what you just mentioned. And one of the things that we track at the Alliance and that we worry about is that it seems like the state of newspapers in particular is changing, and not in a great way for the kind of in-depth stories that were really your bread and butter at the Chronicle. And I wonder who writes these stories if newspapers aren't covering this material in the kind of depth that you have for the last 40 years.
It still gets done, and the decline of newspapers has been somewhat replaced by the rise of endless online media outlets. And some of those places, the Center for Investigative Reporting, Reveal is a site, they'll do in-depth stuff. Cal Matters, and I'm just thinking about here.
They're here somewhere.
Yeah. They do terrific in-depth stuff. At the Chronicle, I was still doing in-depth stuff before I left. I retired last month. And we have well, thank you. This is keeping me a little busy, but so I'm not sitting around in a hammock somewhere. But the woman who's
Thank you, everyone.